the very quick salient facts are that there was a K-9 dog, Loki, who was in the care of Officer Naccarato, and that he perished and died from heat stroke, according to the autopsy, because he was left there. And of course, there are criminal statutes that are applicable when you leave an unattended dog that dies that way. And so we went through an investigation, looking up at videos, gathering interviews and everything. And it is criminally chargeable. And so we wanted to make sure if there was sufficient evidence to support that. And our findings ultimately were that as we went through the analysis, it did not fit into a reckless standard of charge, and let alone even a criminal negligence standard. We went through every iteration that we could. And I think it's important for our community of citizens to know that criminal negligence is fundamentally different than ordinary negligence. It has to have something more. What our evidence did demonstrate that we gathered is that they were out there doing the searches. They came back in. The normal protocol is for the handler to take the dog. There is the kennel space that's created specifically for that purpose. Other officers had gone in. They got called to another thing. Officer Naccarato went with another officer to run some other investigation functions. And subsequently, he comes back, and when it's time to go, he goes down to the kennel, and then realizes, albeit mistakenly, he thought he had left the dog there. He comes back to the truck where the dog was found, and subsequently tragically perished. And when we went through the analysis, we couldn't get to a criminal intent in a way that would warrant the filing of charges. The other thing that we really discovered through this investigative process was that the Department of Corrections did recognize that there is a possibility of human error that happens, and they had purchased a system and that would have prevented this, but it was not operationalized, and there wasn't sufficient training that was given to the handlers. And so we took that into account as well. And then finally, as we said in our analysis, this was an avoidable a tragic loss of life, but nonetheless, it did not rise to a criminal prosecution.
It was a very thorough investigation, despite you not being able to interview the officer himself with him pleading the fifth. How does that factor into your investigation?
It does factor into our investigation in the sense that it is the constitutional right of every person to not share information, but that does not absolve us of our investigative functions. So we had sufficient evidence to look at it. But we still have to make sure that it's admissible evidence. The mens rea or the mental state components, all of those that, like any screening we would go through, we went through. And at the end, we concluded it's non-chargeable.
Mid-90s in terms of temperature. The dog was in an unshaded area. The dog was left in the car for nearly 3 hours. That's ordinary negligence?
That is, well, what it is that we have to be able to attach to the actor the actor's conduct, right? That's negligence in the sense of you and I as average citizens. But now I have to import to the actor that I want to criminally charge to say that they engaged in conduct that rises to a level of criminal negligence, which is differentiated by case law in our state beyond ordinary negligence. It's ordinary negligence plus some more. So, for example, take for somebody who might be driving down the street and they look at their text. Well, that's negligence for the purposes of civil litigation. But if that person is speeding and going in and out and looking at their text, that may become criminal negligence because it's more than mere negligence. And then I could probably criminally charge if I have those other elements as well. So that's one way to sort of tweak that to get an understanding of what we're talking about for our criminal burden of proof.
I look at this really in an interesting fashion myself. I mean, if you leave a child in a hot car and they die for 3 hours in mid-90s unshaded area, you could be looking at criminal charges. A canine officer is a valuable resource and member of law enforcement in our society, but it's almost like no two cases are the same, right? And that's what I'm trying to kind of differentiate myself looking at this as well.
Yeah, I mean, it's if you have a parent who knows that the child is in the car and is leaving that child in the car, then it's knowing, and it's reckless in the sense that they were conscious of it and they disregarded that awareness, right? And you know, it would be another thing, for example, that the person says, you know, if there was some reason to think that that child wasn't there and the person who drove the vehicle didn't know that child was there because somebody had put him there, then we would start thinking about that in a different way. In this case, what allowed us to also look at is that we looked at the conduct and the behavior of the officer as well, right? They come to the thing. He was mistakenly, albeit mistakenly, believed, because when he comes back, he goes to the kennel to retrieve the dog. And so we couldn't just simply ignore that fact. And when he realizes that the dog isn't there, he runs back out to the kennel, to the truck, to find that dog. So we had to recognize that his mens rea, his mental state, was that he had put the dog in the kennel, right? It would be another thing if he was aware that the dog was there and then he lost track of time, and that's a very different analysis. And the other part, like I said, that we did find is the DOC did purchase technology for that human error. They recognized, as an institution, there is the potential for this human error to occur, and they had tried to lay down a foundation to safeguard against that. They bought the technology, but it never got implemented or turned on, and the officers weren't properly trained with that protocol as well, and so we made that finding as well.
Two more quick ones for you. You mentioned
Sure.
something about his mannerisms and not knowing and going back to the kennel. You see that on video, I imagine?
It was both gathered by the evidence of the other witnesses that we talked to, and we have some really distant video where it shows that. So we have to infer from both the interviews that we did, from the reaction of the officer, and to make that inference. Remember, I did not get a chance to talk to the officer, but we can look at the objective facts. Now, if we were to go to court and I was a defense attorney, those are the exact same things that I would be pointing out, right? I would say, this doesn't meet the reckless standard. That's easy. And you're trying to find the criminal negligence standard. It has to be more than just mere ordinary negligence here. And I think even the Department of Corrections understands that this was an avoidable. We're very clear. This was an avoidable loss of life that happened because of the technology and training that was available, but it was not implemented. But then we had to focus on the very specific mental state of this officer. He was distraught. He had gone to the kennel to retrieve the dog. He finds that it was a human error. It was a tragic loss of life, but it did not rise to a level of criminal accountability which we have the statutes to prosecute people for.
How often are you coming across an officer who pleads the fifth?
We see it very often. Whether it's an officer or a citizen, under our due process and our criminal justice system, if I was investigating you, I can't compel you to give me an interview. That's not our system. And now, and I've said this before, whether officers cooperate with me, don't cooperate with me, whether they provide their statement or don't provide, we have an ethical obligation as the Salt Lake County DA's office to try to share with our community what we found and what we are acting upon, the evidence that we do discover. We still have an obligation to explain to our citizens what happened. In this case, it's tax dollars that pay for this dog. It's tax dollars that provide for the training and everything. And there's a loss of life. We have a state statute that says you can't leave animals in a hot car knowingly without some criminal culpability. But we still have to look at the totality of the facts. We have to look at the evidence that is admissible to criminally charge somebody with that. And that was really what our analysis is. So whether they cooperate or not, it is a framework that we have to work in, but we try to construct logically and reasonably what we can see and then make the reasonable inferences from that, which we know would be made in a court of law.